everybody, Scott Pendleton here. I'm back for part 3 of our video series. And in our last video, we talked a little bit about getting us up to our conditional approval. We talked a little bit about what a conditional approval is. Well, today we're going to talk about getting you from that conditional approval to your final approval and the closing. So once we get that conditional approval that we discussed, the first thing that my processor and I are going to do is we're going to review that and make sure that everything looks legit and we agree with the underwriter. Once we reviewed everything and think everything looks good, my processor is going to send you a list of documentation that the underwriter wants to see. And please get us back that documentation as quickly as we can. One of the things that we're constantly doing here is monitoring the timeline on our loans. If you remember, we discussed most contracts are 30 days. So we have a finite timeline. You have a contractual date that you need to close. And for us to be able to do that, we need your help. We need to get us stuff as soon as we ask for it. We need to get us stuff back in a timely manner. So that's very important. So let's talk about clearing those conditions. We send you a checklist of the items that we need. You're going to send those back to the processor. The processor is going to review them, make sure that everything looks good, and they're going to submit everything back to the underwriter. Please understand, this comes up quite often. Every time we send an underwriter something new, there's the potential that the underwriter may have more questions and more conditions. So a good example of that might be a bank statement. Let's say the underwriter asks for an updated bank statement, and your parents are very gracious and they love you a lot and they give you $10,000 because they know you're just going to need the money. They know when you're buying a house, you're using up all the assets that you have, you're buying your first home, and they know you're going to need stuff, plates, furniture, silverware, all that new stuff that goes along with owning a home, right? So they graciously give you $10,000. That's perfectly fine. We understand it happens all the time. But if you communicate that with us, we will take you down the path of the proper documentation that we need. Gift letters, we've got to source where the money's coming from. We have guidelines on these type of things. Because of the Patriot Act, we have to source large deposits. If we send that back to an underwriter and we don't source where that money's coming from, the underwriter is going to give us conditions saying, hey, where did this $10,000 come from? I need to know where the money came from, because they have certain guidelines that they need to file. So that's just one example, but there could be other things as well. So it's just very important that you communicate with us. If something happens, if something changes, jobs change sometimes, whatever the case may be, don't wait. Tell us right away. Let us walk it through with you together. There might be some additional documentation we need. Whatever the case may be, we can typically work through most issues. You just need to communicate with us. So let's say it's a perfect world. You send us all the conditions back. We send it back to the underwriter. Typically within 24 to 48 hours, the underwriter is going to review and clear those conditions. So let's say it all goes through one time. The underwriter clears everything and issues a final approval. What we call it in the business is a clear to close. The 3 best words a mortgage banker ever hears is clear to close. We love those 3 words. Once we have a clear to close, we've got our final approval, the underwriter's done with the file, and we're done. Right? Well, not quite. The next step is we've got to get your loan to our closing department, and we need to get closing docs out to the title company. There's another step in this process called the closing disclosure. By federal law, we have to get a settlement statement, a final settlement statement, a closing disclosure in your hands and sign a minimum of 3 days prior to closing. We send that form to you so you can e-sign, but it's very important that we get that CD or closing disclosure to you within 3 days prior to closing. It's a new federal law that went into effect about 2 years ago, and it's very important that we have that process in place. We typically are going to, well, not always, but a lot of times we'll send that closing disclosure out to you before we even have a clear to close. We want to make sure that we have our timeline moving along. Like I said, we're constantly monitoring the timeline of these loans, and we will often get that closing disclosure out to you before we even get our clear to close. But, you know, once we get that CD out to you and sign it, the CD is your final numbers, right? We talked about the loan estimate. The loan estimate is your estimate of fees. Your closing disclosure is the actual fees. These are the final numbers. It's got all the tax prorations and everything, you know, on it. And we'll explain that to you in detail. When that closing disclosure goes out, you'll get a phone call from me and we'll go over it line by line, okay? So once we've got our CD signed, our 3 days clock is ticking, we've got closing disclosures out to the title company. That's when the title company kind of takes over at that point. And we haven't really talked much about the title company through this process, but they're very important. The title company, while we're processing the loan, they have a process as well, and they're really making sure that the property has clear title. They're making sure there's no liens or encumbrances on the property. they're doing a lot of work on their end as well. One other important thing that they do is they handle all the money coming in. So we wire money to them, you wire money to them, and they make sure all the money goes in the right places. They handle all the funds coming in for the transaction. Plus, they're the people that will notarize your documents at closing typically. So with that being said, the title company is a very important part of this process. But typically, you'll go to closing at the title company. Sometimes you'll do it here in my office. I've done closings in all over the place. Restaurants, Starbucks, doesn't really matter. We'll close anywhere. Once you go to closing, though, you're going to sign all the closing disclosures. You're going to sign your mortgage, your note. Everything's going to be notarized. And once you sign on the dotted line, it's your house. You own a home at that point. So congratulations are in order then, and it's a very exciting time. Now, understand that we're here for you to answer any questions that you have throughout the process. And when your loan is closed, it doesn't mean we're going anywhere. Our goal is to be your lender for life. Hopefully you'll move up to a bigger home one day. You may know friends or family that are looking to purchase a home. We want to help them as well. So if you ever have questions after we close, call us. If there's questions regarding homestead exemption, escrows, we're here to answer those questions for you. We're always here to help. So I hope this 3-part video series was informative for you. No way I could cover everything in the mortgage process in 3 short videos, but I hope this helped. You can go back and watch this over and over again. Feel free to share it with your friends, anybody you know looking to purchase a home. So once again, my name is Scott Pendleton. I love what I do, love helping people buy homes. If I can ever help you or anybody you know, it's greatly appreciated that you share my information with them. So I hope this helped. Thanks very much and have a great day.